Hello class, today we're going to be looking at the U.S. government and the early republic from 1789 to 1800. We're going to look at our first president. George Washington was elected unanimously as our country's first president, and this is because he was the leader of the American Revolution that helped us gain our freedom. Remember, he was a great leader and a wise man. Despite the fact that every state ratified the Constitution, and Constitution means to approve, differences of opinion remain about the role and power of our central government. Anytime you see central, that means federal. So let's talk about how Washington was as a president. As the first president, Washington set examples that later were followed by later executives, which is called precedent. You do what the previous people have done or previous laws. That's what precedent means, doing previous. Washington's cabinet advised him on a variety of issues. So he is going to create a cabinet. Right now, our current cabinet includes 15 members. A president can add cabinets. George W. Bush added the Department of Homeland Security after September 11th attacks to basically monitor terrorism towards the United States. There was also the rise of political parties happened during his presidency. You're going to have the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Those are going to be our first two political parties. If you think about it, with the ratification of the Constitution, you had anti-Federalists and Federalists. But in his farewell address, Washington spoke about his vision and hopes for the new United States, and he did warn against political parties. He said they would doom the nation and cause division. So who was part of Washington's cabinet? He surrounded himself with bright minds who could advise him on war, legal issues, finance, and the economy and foreign affairs. If you look, you have John Adams, which is his vice president. We've discussed John Adams when we looked at the American Revolution. That's the video that we watched. You have Henry Knox. He's going to be the Secretary of War, and Attorney General is going to be Edmund Randolph. Alexander Hamilton is going to be the Secretary of Treasury. He grew up in humble beginnings, meaning he didn't have a lot of money. He was a Federalist. He was very close to Washington, and he favored the creation of a national bank. Thomas Jefferson, he's the Secretary of State. He was a Virginia planter. He was actually a Democratic Republican. He became critical of Washington's presidency, and he was a supporter of republicanism, which he was a supporter of the French Revolution. So let's look at the Federalists and Republicans. What makes them different? First of all, political parties are organizations that seek to achieve group goals through political power. Our present-day political parties, Republicans and Democrats, they both believe in democracy and the right of the people. It's just they don't agree on the role of the government in several different things like taxation, marriage, education. That's where they have a difference of opinion. So who were the Federalists? It was Alexander Hamilton, John Adams, and George Washington. They believed that the power should belong to the elite, educated, and rich. And they felt that the government should have a strong central government where most of the power is in the federal government. The economy, they looked at it as industrial, manufacturing, trade, which they believed in mercantile. The Constitution should be interpreted loosely, like we're not going to read the Constitution for word by word. The Constitution says Congress has the power to collect taxes. So loosely looking at the Constitution, the power to collect taxes, you create the IRS, and then you create different forms of taxes to collect. They did support Britain because of trade benefited the United States by supporting Britain in the Jay Treaty. The Republicans were made up of Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. James Madison is the person that is known as the father of the Constitution because he wrote most of the Constitution. He wrote the Virginia Plan. He believed in a strong federal government, but he also believed that state government should have most of the power. Thomas Jefferson, remember him, he was the father of the Declaration of Independence. He wrote most of it when we declared our independence from Britain. They felt that power belongs to the people, not only to the rich and educated. The role of government, that state government should have most of the power. The economy was farming. Supporters were commoners and farmers, and they felt like the Constitution should be interpreted strictly or literally. Like whatever the Constitution says is what we should do. They supported the French Revolution because of its Republican liberty freedom ideals. Alexander Hamilton, he in his financial plan, the United States had a huge war debt, basically 54 million from the Revolutionary War. Until they pay their debts, the United States would not be able to get credit, meaning or borrow money, because that's what credit cards do. You pay for stuff, and you actually don't have the money, you're borrowing it. He wanted to do three things. He wanted to pay off war debts. He assumed state debts, which was $22 million. Southern states were not happy about that. Pay back bonds, which were loans people gave the United States during the war who expect to be paid back with interest by creating new debt. Create a national bank, issue money, give loans to businesses, and safe for government to keep. They felt that it was not fair. Increased revenue means increased money. So let's add taxes to whiskey that will bring in more money. And also let's implement tariffs, which tariffs are taxes on imported goods that raise money and encourage people to buy American goods, such as, for example, cars. Foreign cars cost more than if you buy like a Ford or a car that was built in the United States. But if you buy a Toyota Camry, it's going to cost more than a Ford because it's foreign made, and they added tariffs to make the price go up higher to encourage you to buy an American-made car. So who didn't like Hamilton's plan? The Republicans led by James Madison opposed Hamilton's plan because it favored northern states. It made the rich richer and gave more power to the central government, which is federal, the national bank. They reached a compromise. It was called the Dinner Table Compromise, where Madison would get support for the plan if the new capital would be located near Virginia. So basically bringing it to the middle between the North and the South. And that's the D.C. Our capital, our nation's capital is D.C., which is in the middle between the North and the South. So looking at the Whiskey Rebellion, as part of Alexander Hamilton's tax program, a tax on whiskey was passed by the House of Representatives. This tax was imposed by farmers in western Pennsylvania who distilled their grain into whiskey. They also used whiskey for money. Farmers attacked tax collectors. Hamilton led 13,000 militiamen to put down the rebellion. The farmers fled before they met the troops. And in the Judiciary Act of 1789, Article 3 established the Supreme Court, but it leaves many questions unanswered. So the act basically gave the Supreme Court 6 members. Today it has 9. It's an odd number in case there's a tie. And it organized the lower federal courts that leads up to the Supreme Court. We also still have Native Americans in the area. Washington sought to protect Indian lands by issuing the Proclamation of 1790, which forbade moving to Indian lands. Sound familiar? Yes, because they tried to do the same thing with the Proclamation of 1763. Most Americans ignored the order, and conflicts with Native Americans happened often. So his farewell address. The address wasn't a speech, but a letter to the American people. What was Washington's major points? Alliances are temporary, and the U.S. should have relationships with other countries that are beneficial. For the time being, this probably meant staying out of European affairs. This is isolationism, or you basically isolate ourselves. So be careful. The American public should start thinking of themselves as Americans rather than just Virginians or New Englanders. A strong central government was necessary, which we have that today. This our true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. This is, a primary source quote from the speech. Our second president is going to be John Adams. He is going to actually be a participant in the XYZ affair. In 1796, John Adams, a Federalist, was elected president by 71 electoral votes. Thomas Jefferson, Republican, was elected vice president with 68 votes. During this time period, they used the Electoral College to elect the president and vice president. They didn't run together on a ticket like we do now. Like Hillary Clinton ran with her VP on the same ticket, and Donald Trump with the same ticket in the 2016 election. So John Adams began his presidency while relations with the French were tense. The French were seizing American ships. So Adams sent U.S. officials to meet and negotiate with the French in Paris. French ministers, they were nicknamed X, Y, and Z, said the French will only deal with the Americans if they paid a bribe. This shocked the Americans and led to anti-French feelings in the United States when the details were released. This incident became known as the XYZ affair. Taking advantage of the anti-French feelings, Federalists passed the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798. These laws included new powers to deport foreigners, or aliens. It raised the length of time required to live in the United States before becoming a citizen from 5 years to 14 years. Like, you had to live in the United States now for 14 years before they would even let you become a United States citizen. The Sedition Act made it a crime to criticize the government. So this is actually like a violation of your First Amendment freedom of speech. And the Republican newspaper editors were thrown in jail for doing so. These laws are unpopular, especially in the South, and some argue they don't have to follow them, which is nullification. And that concludes this lecture video.